It has to do with food, fertilizer, and the global outlook itself.
Let me show you the Dow 30 in the components. Salesforce is currently the biggest win, as you can see there. Walmart is at the bottom. And that is your Dash the Bell. I'm Isa Suarez. The closing bell is ringing. On Wall Street, the lead with Jake Tapper starts right now.
A potentially big moment, but can the U.S. Senate even pass a small bill when it comes to guns? The lead starts right now. Spotted at the White House, a key senator pivotal to gun negotiations. What his appearance might signal about a potential deal, plus a devastating account from a teacher inside a Uvalde classroom.
I told my kids to act like they're asleep, so I'm gonna act like I'm asleep also. And I prayed and prayed that I would not hear none of my students talk.
Why this Uvalde teacher now says he is angry at law enforcement, who he heard in the hallway while 11 of his students were being killed. And office ultimatums. Return to the office or lose your job. The tough decision more workers are now facing. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We start with our politics lead today. President Biden now getting involved as a key Democratic senator says negotiations with Republicans on gun reform have reached a, quote, critical stage. That Democrat, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, visited the White House today to give President Biden a rundown of where bipartisan negotiations stand before Murphy headed back to the Hill for yet another meeting with his fellow negotiators. Those lawmakers have expressed growing optimism that a deal for a narrow, targeted bill could potentially be reached as soon as the end of this week. So what remains on the table? Well, incentivizing states to pass red flag laws, potential waiting periods for 18 to 21-year-olds buying firearms such as AR-15s, new funding for school security, and potential investments in mental health care. And while some may find hope in this possible achievement, it is also worth pointing out all the items that Republicans appear to have taken off the table, including raising the minimum age of purchasers of AR-15 style weapons from 18 to 21, a ban on some semi-automatic rifles, universal background checks, and restricting high-capacity magazines. Now, the White House is hoping to capitalize on the apparent momentum today. They seized on the power and influence of Hollywood and one of Texas's favorite sons, actor Matthew McConaughey. He's a Uvalde, Texas native. He spoke at today's White House briefing after a meeting with top Republican and Democratic lawmakers about his ideas for gun reform and school safety. Today, we are also hearing for the first time the heartbreaking account of one of the teachers who survived that school massacre. Arnulfo Reyes was shot twice. 11 of his students were killed. And now he tells ABC News' Amy Robach that he will never forgive law enforcement for their delay in entering the classroom.
After everything, I get more angry because you have a bulletproof vest. I had nothing.
Let's get straight to the White House and CNN's Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, how close does the Biden administration think a deal could be?
Well, Jake, they seem optimistic. And President Biden, they said, is cautiously hopeful that potentially they could be on their way to potentially a deal. There's obviously a reason for a lot of caution here, but President Biden did have a 40-minute meeting with one of the top Democratic negotiators who's working with Republicans on potentially reaching some bipartisan agreement here. And the reason the White House says President Biden is optimistic is talking about his own years in the Senate, his own years working on gun control and gun restrictions that they said took such a long time to actually come together. And they said that's why he's so hopeful by what he's seen in the last few days.
We haven't seen this type of negotiations or this type of coming together from both sides in a very long time. It's been decades. So he is encouraged. He is optimistic about what he's seeing, about what he is hearing, the update that he received. And so we're going to see how those negotiations go. He believes any step is a step forward.
Now, Jake, that last part there is notable, saying any step is a step forward, according to the press secretary, when it comes to President Biden. That was when I asked if he would accept whatever deal lawmakers could come to, should they come to an agreement, or if there is something that President Biden certainly wants in there, a line that he draws of what he wants that legislation to look like. They say, really, Jake, they believe any progress is progress. Of course, the timeline really remains to be seen here.
And Caitlin, actor Matthew McConaughey, he's a Uvalde, Texas native, and he spent time meeting with victims' families in his hometown. He just spoke at the White House briefing about those meetings. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Jake, it was a really emotional moment in the briefing room. Obviously, Matthew McConaughey is from Uvalde, Texas. He said he went down there with his wife and his own children right after the shooting had occurred. The day after, he said they drove down there. They've been meeting with the parents and the families and just everyone in this community and talking to them about what has happened in the aftermath of that. And clearly, he spent a lot of time with these children's families because he was going into detail, paying tribute to them, Jake, talking about their artwork, talking about how one of them wanted to grow up to be a marine biologist. One thing he did note, Jake, is his wife was sitting in the corner of the briefing room. She was holding a pair of green Converse tennis shoes. Matthew McConaughey said that the reason she was holding those was because there was one student, one little girl, who was only able to be identified because she was wearing those shoes. And Jake, he was talking about how he has talked to morticians who are down there. He has talked to a lot of the funeral home directors who had not slept because they've been dealing with so many funerals. And he said that those who do the makeup on people at funerals were saying that they couldn't even properly do their jobs because of just how severely maimed these children were after being murdered.
These bodies were very different. They needed much more than makeup to be presentable. They needed extensive restoration. Why? Due to the exceptionally large exit wounds of an AR-15 rifle. Most of the body so mutilated that only DNA test or green Converse could identify them.
So, Jake, that was really how the entire moment was when he was in the briefing room. I've been in the briefing room a lot. Oftentimes, reporters are tweeting, they're on their phones, they're taking notes. It was pretty much silent in the room as Matthew McConaughey was speaking and talking about what he and his wife had seen on the ground in Uvalde in the last several days. He pounded his fist at sometimes, talking about how these little kids had dreams they're never going to get to fulfill. He called for responsible gun ownership. He's a gun owner himself, Jake, but it was a moment that came, we should note, after he had met with President Biden earlier in the day.
Yeah, I believe the green Converse sneakers were Maite Rodriguez. I think that was the name of the victim for that particular story. Caitlin Collins at the White House, thank you so much. For the first time in more than a week, we are hearing from investigators in Uvalde. So what are they saying? Well, they say don't expect a report from the Texas Rangers or from the FBI for, quote, a while. This lack of information, lack of an update, comes as a teacher who was in one of the classrooms with the shooter is speaking out. CNN's Omar Jimenez is in Uvalde with what the teacher told his students to do as the gunman walked into their classroom.
Our priorities are for the families who lost children.
Despite a special city council meeting, few answers from public officials.
Well, there's an investigation going on, and we'll find out what happened. I want those answers just like everybody else. I want to be transparent. I want to be clear.
It's now been 2 weeks since the shooting, but the pain hasn't gone anywhere.
And I said, if I die, don't let it be in vain.
Arnulfo Reyes was teaching his 4th grade class when they all began to hear the gunshots.
The kids started asking out loud, Mr. Reyes, what is going on? And I said, I don't know what's going on, but let's go ahead and get under the table. Get under the table and act like you're asleep. As they were doing that, and I was gathering them under the table and told them to act like they were going to sleep, is about the time when I turned around and saw him standing there.
Reyes was then shot and says he had to play dead for over an hour. Much of that time, law enforcement was just outside the door.
You're supposed to protect and serve. There is no excuse for their actions. And I will never forgive them. I lost 11 that day. And I just went to my parents and said, I'm sorry. I tried my best with what I was told to do. Please don't be angry with me.
For the survivors, it's going to be a long road to normal. The grandfather of Leanne Garcia, another young survivor who was shot in the face, told CNN,
Todavía escucha los balazos.
she still hears bullets, he says, and even now gets scared at the slightest sounds. It's why her mother, along with the parents of 3 other young survivors, are now suing the estate of the shooter for damages, alleging in part he intentionally injured these young children, stole their innocence, and forever changed their lives. It's trauma Reyes miraculously survived, and now he's not going to settle with just being alive.
I will go anywhere to the end of the world to not let my students die in vain. They didn't deserve this. Nobody in this world deserves this kind of pain. I will go to the end of the world to make sure things get changed.
And that, of course, becomes the question. Tomorrow, we're expecting to hear testimony from a 4th grader, Mia Cerrillo, from here in Uvalde, the parents of 10-year-old Lexi Rubio, who were killed, and the mother of someone who was injured in Buffalo, that shooting that killed 10 and happened less than 10 days before this one. All of them hoping, as many do after these tragedies, that their stories can have at least some form of an impact on long-term change, especially when it comes to safety in the classroom. Jake.
Omar Jimenez, thank you so much. Joining us now is Becky Pringle. She is a former 8th grade science teacher and currently the president of the National Education Association. She will be testifying before the House Oversight Committee on Gun Violence tomorrow as well. Very powerful interview with that teacher by Amy Robach of ABC News. As a former teacher, what goes through your mind when you hear a story like that?
Oh, Jake, that was hard to listen to.
Yeah, it really was, yeah.
23 years ago, I was teaching my middle school students in April 1999 when 12 students and 1 teacher were killed in Columbine. And I can remember coming, just brought it all back to me, coming back to school the next day, and like so many millions of teachers today, in this moment, are faced with that question. I was faced with that same question. Mrs. Pringle, are we safe? Could that happen here? That was 23 years ago.
And before the mass shootings became as common as they are now.
I know. And at that time, ironically, I've been teaching for 23 years. There was no training or preparation I had to answer that question, but this is what I believed, that as Americans, we wouldn't let it happen again. But it's 23 years later, and here we are. 19 babies and 2 teachers are dead again because we have not done anything about gun violence in this country.
I want to replay a moment from the teacher. Let's play that if we could.
I went to my parents and said, I'm sorry. I tried my best with what I was told to do. Please don't be angry with me.
I mean, when you hear the pain in his voice, you know that it's not just 21 lives that are destroyed. There are a lot more lives that have been destroyed. Maybe they weren't killed, but their lives will never be the same. The governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, has ordered that all Texas school districts go through active shooter training that includes school-based law enforcement and administrators. What's your reaction when you hear that?
You heard the teacher say it all, right? He did what he was taught to do. It didn't stop the killings. You can't stop military-grade assault weapons with training on what to do. They take lives too fast, and that's what he was talking about as he shared his story. We've been through that, right? Where we practice for fire drills in my time, was duck and cover as though that was protecting us from a nuclear bomb.
Right.
Right, but we did it. We did that. So it's not that schools shouldn't prepare to try to keep kids safe, but let us not be distracted from what needs to happen in this country. We know that we must pass comprehensive common sense gun laws that the majority of Americans support.
Yeah, that's your position. That's the position of the National Educational Association. It looks as though the Senate possibly will pass a small version of what you're talking about, not comprehensive, not banning AR-15 style weapons, but smaller, possibly incentivizing states to pass red flag laws and other measures. What would be your response? I mean, just practically speaking, you're not going to get what you want. How will you react if the Senate does pass something, but much smaller, much more modest than what you want?
We might not get what our students need in this moment, but do something. Do something. If we get red flag laws, yes, let's do that. If we get any change to the background checks, let's do that. If we get anything that goes near the safe storage laws, let's do that. Let's do something. Make no mistake, we will not stop fighting for comprehensive gun law legislation in this country, because that's what we need. So we won't stop, but do something, and do it now.
I have said many times on the show, after school shooting, after school shooting, after school shooting, the adults of the United States continue to fail the children of the United States. Becky Pringle.
We're 25 times more likely to be impacted by gun violence in this country. It's not okay. Jake, is that who we are? Is that who we are? We're standing up and saying it is not who we are. And we are going to fight until we are worthy of our students.
Former 8th grade science teacher and current NEA president, Becky Pringle, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, the plotting and the scheming to keep Trump in power despite the results of the 2020 election. A new email reveals a secret plan that tried to do just that. And one of the few issues lawmakers are able to agree on this hour. We're going to have a Republican and a Democrat together here on the show as momentum grows for legislation that's been years in the making. What is it? Stay with us.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front on CNN.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson. starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN. Heard it all before? But have you heard it like this?
The ultimate disruptor looks set to shake up our world. We really can't ignore the impact that this has. What can we do that explores a fresh angle? So let's untangle the players and political forces. The truth is a lot more complex. What's really going on?
Fast-paced news, in-depth reports, and fact checks from the perspective of The Global Brief with Bianca Nobilo. Tonight on CNN.
And we're back with the Politics Lead. New details about exactly who and what we will see in the first public hearing of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection. Sources say that Thursday's primetime hearing will include testimony from two people who directly interacted with the far-right extremist group, the Proud Boys, on and around January 6th. The Justice Department charged 5 members of the Proud Boys, including its leader, with seditious conspiracy. That is a major escalation in the case. But Thursday's hearing is not just about the mob that stormed the Capitol that day. More broadly, the hearing is about a months-long strategy by Donald Trump and his supporters and allies, so desperate to hold on to power that they were willing to take away legal votes from American voters. Let's get to CNN's Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill for us. Ryan, tell us more about these witnesses and why their testimony is considered so important.
Well, Jake, one of the things the committee's tried to zero in on is their evidence that there was premeditation leading up to January 6th, that what happened here on that day wasn't just an organic uprising from a crowd of peaceful demonstrators, that there were actually plans for people to storm the Capitol on that day. And that's one of the reasons that they focused in on these right-wing extremist groups like the Proud Boys. And one of the people we expect to testify on Thursday night is Nick Quested, who's a documentarian who was embedded with the Proud Boys, not just on that day, but also in the weeks leading up to the event. I'm told the committee views him as a first-hand fact witness. He basically was a fly on the wall with the Proud Boys during their planning leading up to January 6th. Not only does he have footage that's never been seen before of their activity leading up to that day, but he also was privy to conversations and other planning that took place, and it's expected to be a big part of what we see on Thursday night. Jake.
And Ryan, federal prosecutors obtained an email that the Trump campaign sent to Georgia Republicans who were trying to overturn the election. How might that factor into these hearings?
Well, one of the other things the committee is trying to demonstrate is that these efforts to undermine the election were not conducted in good faith, and that there was actually a conspiracy afoot, that many of these people connected to the former President Donald Trump knew that he lost the election, but were still peddling this narrative that there was widespread fraud everywhere. And to that end, they need to show evidence that the actions that they were taking during that time were not in good faith. And this particular email that was discovered came from a Trump official to individuals in Georgia, where they were meeting as part of a group of electors, fake electors, we should point out, that were going to vote electors for Donald Trump in the event that the Georgia election were overturned, the actual results were overturned and given to Trump instead. And in that email, the Trump official specifically tells those involved to keep the event secret. Legal experts would tell you that if you're trying to hide something, that could mean that you're up to something that could be criminal or just not good. And that is part of this conversation and part of what the committee is investigating. Jake?
Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill, thanks so much. Coming up next on the front lines of war, an exclusive perspective you will only see on CNN. Stay with us.
Culinary Journeys, in association with Ajinomoto.
Meet Fumie Miyoshi, the chef and owner behind the famous Sushi Take.
そうですね。あとは
With sushi, you eat it with rice. It's a balance. You work with the fish so it goes well with the vinegared rice. Together, it's delicious. I make sushi while trying to bring out the umami.
Today, she has become one of the most recognized sushi chefs in the upscale Ginza neighborhood of Tokyo.
I think sushi is a way of thinking. It's something you grip with your hands, but feelings will come out through the way it's made. In that sense, I always try to stay as calm as possible.
The pandemic reminded us of how important diet is to health. That's why the Ajinomoto Group is committed to solving health issues around the world at the dinner table. A real solution means never settling for less.
ถึงแม้ว่าจะต้องลดความเค็มในอาหารลงแต่เราก็ต้องไม่ละทิ้งความอร่อยเราต้องการให้ทุกท่านได้เพลิดเพลินกับรสชาติความอร่อยของอาหารไปพร้อมกับสุขภาพที่ดี
A saúde é importante, mas queremos considerar também o legado do sabor regional. Como podemos melhorar o balanço nutricional mantendo o respeito à cultura gastronômica? Esse é o nosso desafio.
Tempat yang jauh pun bukan masalah. Kami selalu bisa menyediakannya. Kami terus mengupayakan dunia di mana siapapun bisa mengakses makanan bergizi dimanapun mereka berada.
We're here to provide nutritious meals to the entire world without compromising on taste, local ways of life, or accessibility, because that is nutrition without compromise.
Eat well, live well.
I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta in New York, and this is CNN.
Mainland China tolerates no signs of dissent whatsoever.
Are you anticipating dozens of people being prosecuted? Hundreds? Thousands?
We're flying over ISIS front lines. This is the only protection we have. Nerves are still very much on edge. Firefighters have been battling this blaze for weeks. This is unfolding in front of our eyes.
Ivan Watson, CNN.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
I'm Larry Madowo in Kilifi, Kenya, and this is CNN.
In our world lead now, President Volodymyr Zelensky's forces in Ukraine are holding on by a thread in the east, defending the last city under their control in Luhansk. The military head of Severodonetsk says it's a, quote, consistently difficult situation as Putin's army relentlessly bombs that town. As Russia remains hyper-focused on the battle in the east, CNN's Matthew Chance got exclusive access to another front line in the south, where Ukraine says their forces are steadily pushing back on Russia's advances.
This is where the Ukrainian military tells us they're seizing back their lands. but on the battered southern front with Russia, the stalemate of trench warfare seems to be setting in. And commanders privately admit advances by either side here are small. The Russians seem to be running out of ammunition, and they're not as strong as they were, the platoon commander of this forward trench told me. But we need more weapons too, he adds, if we're to push ahead.
I'm speaking to Anton here, and he's saying it is очень громко, it is very loud at night. Громко вечером, да?
Вечером очень, да.
Но утром?
Бывает, но реже, очень реже.
Right, so in the morning he's saying it's not so noisy, it's a bit quieter. So it's interesting because this is the place where the Ukrainian government say there's a big counter-offensive that's been underway for some time and they're taking back territory, but we've not seen a great deal of evidence of that on the ground. It seems that, you know, both sides dug in here heavily, have fought themselves to a standstill. Neither side strong enough to win this war, but not weak enough to lose it either.
Oh, that's outgoing, is it? You sure? You can hear the outgoing artillery shells streaming across our position here. Our Ukrainian military escorts take us to what they say is a recently liberated zone, where at least 30 Russians holed up inside this kindergarten were killed. As Moscow focuses its forces on Donbass in the east, Ukrainian officials say conquered areas in the south, like this, are being left exposed. All right, well, they've brought to this very forward location where, as you can hear, there are still artillery exchanges taking place. And this is the remnants of a battle from a couple of weeks ago, they say, where this Russian position was taken by Ukrainian forces at great cost, both to the Ukrainians and obviously to the Russians as well. All of this debris on the ground is, we're told, Russian equipment, and obviously this is the remnants of a Russian armoured vehicle of some kind, which has been, like so many we've seen, totally destroyed in this bitter conflict. The Russians thought that they were going to win easily, didn't they?
Yes.
But that's not what's happening.
Of course, Russian thought a few days finished war in Ukraine. In a few days.
We can hear it's still going on now.
It's shell, and we can hear flight of shell.
Yeah, months later.
Russian government planned have victory in a few days. I think we must be ready to a long war.
A long artillery war, with heavy weapons like this Ukrainian battle tank positioned in tree lines towards an unseen enemy. These firing points quickly become vulnerable, and the troops here need to be mobile.
Okay, well, we've been brought to this frontline position where they're going to fire on Russian forces a short distance away. It's a secret location. We can only stay for one round, we're told. After that, there's going to be return fire, and we've got to get out of here. But this is what we've been brought to see. Goodness me. Okay, guys, what now? Another one. I thought we had to go after one.
Once more again.
One more again.
Seconds later, another bone-shaking round hurtles towards Russian positions. Okay, we've got to go now. Come on. And we quickly leave Ukraine's grinding front lines behind. Jake, shortly after we fled that location, we did see a shell incoming into approximately the location where we were, which underlines that even though this frontline position does look quite static, a bit like, you know, reminiscent of World War I trench warfare, it is in fact still a very dangerous place. Jake, back to you.
I'm glad you got out of there. Matthew Chance in Ukraine, thanks so much. Next here in the U.S., a growing shift in the American workforce as more employers are giving their workers an ultimatum: come back to the office now or else. Stay with us.
Bollywood, a protracted pandemic fractured this more than a century-old industry, sending profits tumbling as in-theatre audiences stayed away. Analysts say India is still watching Bollywood at a record rate. They're simply doing so online.
I think we've reached significant scale during the pandemic. What we've seen is that the top 30 to 40 million, the premium audiences, they have taken extensively to OTT streaming.
Analysts say India's rapidly growing mobile internet population is behind much of this growth. Here in India, local homegrown players continue to thrive in the market.
Krishna Bhagwan.
Streaming giant ZEE5 claims to have the most offerings in South Asia.
Going digital was on the back of wanting to really connect directly with the consumer.
Our mission is to see this young generation of leaders growing up make change in the world. My name is Edlira Debrane, and I'm the Communications Officer of Finnish School of Kosovo here in Kosovo, Europe. We created a wall of freedom, which is still in our halls. We organized a bake sale where we collected over 500 euros, which are going to be donated to an organization against domestic violence. I would say the one that we are most proud of is the Set in Stone Garden. For over a month, each student gathered rocks. We took these rocks, we wrote down our vows and pledges to end modern-day slavery, and then we took all those rocks outside in the middle of our schoolyard, and we spelled out My Freedom Day. So we had this really cool shot where everybody was shouting out My Freedom Day, sort of like a symbolic way to say that our pledges are actually set in stone and they will remain there forever. This, I believe, has made a very long-lasting impact on them, and it's something that they have vowed to actually take on in the following months. You'll see them around the school still doing other things for My Freedom Day.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
World Sport. For World Sport, I'm Coy Wyatt.
I'm Amanda Davis.
I'm Andy Scholes.
I'm Don Riddell.
I'm Alex Thomas.
I'm Patrick Snell.
And this
is CNN.
And our money lead a growing battle over return to work policies as the United States tries to return to somewhat normal. Many businesses here are requiring workers to return to the office on a full-time basis, but some American workers are balking, having grown accustomed to the flexibility of remote work during the pandemic, perhaps some even thinking they are more productive at home than in the office. And now, as CNN's Gabe Cohen reports, a slowing economy could give employers more leverage to force employees back to the office.
As Shannon Archuleta hunts for a new tech job, deserting her home office and spending less time with her father has become a deal breaker.
I will only work remote. I, have the flexibility to be able to take care of the things and responsibilities that I need to while being productive for the workforce.
It's a growing source of tension between employees and management. Surveys show millions of workers want to stay home and would likely quit their job rather than go back to a daily commute. Now, more executives may test that. Elon Musk is the latest, demanding Tesla workers return to the office full-time or quit. Goldman Sachs is already back full-time, and 90% of JP Morgan's U.S. staff is there at least 3 days a week. Their CEO, Jamie Dimon, saying work from home doesn't work for those who want to hustle, according to Reuters.
I'm trying to fill up office buildings.
In New York, Mayor Eric Adams sent a memo telling city workers to get back to the office to re-energize the city's economy. A May survey found 76% of high-up executives say in-person work is critical. But overall, as of this week, employee office visits are barely over 40% of pre-pandemic levels, largely because in this hot jobs market with 11 million openings, workers have leverage.
If the employers put a firm stake in the ground and say, you must come back, there's that risk that people are going to move to a new job.
Apple delayed its return to office plans after backlash from employees, as did Cognizant, which helps operate Google Maps, after more than 100 workers signed a petition, some threatening to strike if forced to return.
We have been extremely productive and successful in these last 2 years, so it's a huge win for us.
A survey tracking remote work since the early pandemic shows more companies are coming around on a post-pandemic hybrid work schedule, with, on average, 30% of workdays done from home, compared to 5% pre-pandemic.
In this case, it's very clear that hybrid is here to stay.
This will become one more differentiating factor among employers.
One looming wrinkle, projections of a market cooldown and possible recession in the months ahead, which could tilt the tables and give employers more leverage.
Over the next 90 to 120 days, we should fully suspect that it won't just be the Elon Musk of the world. There are going to be a lot of CEOs who are going to demand that employees come back to work, at least partly.
So we should continue to see workers shuffling around as some companies take this firm stance on returning to the office, and many others use a hybrid schedule as a huge hiring incentive to attract talent, maybe even, Jake, for less money. And these surveys that we're seeing so far indicate that could actually be a good strategy.
Interesting. Gabe Cohen, thanks so much. A huge move by the U.S. Senate today, worthy of praise. We've been talking about this one on the lead for years and years. I'm going to be joined by a Republican and a Democrat together next to discuss.
Redwood Materials is a sustainable battery materials company. So, we focus on, building a closed loop ecosystem for lithium-ion batteries. We recycle old lithium-ion batteries of all different types, both automotive, but also consumer electronics. We take the materials out of those batteries, refine them, extract them, and then remanufacture them into new components that can go directly back into battery manufacture. So I see this eventually, going to be the vast majority of the materials that are going into batteries that will be recycled in the future. Batteries are amazing because they are so recyclable. More than 90% of the materials, those critical materials in the battery, can be reused many, many times without degradation. I think people are really realizing the benefits of having a high recycled material content, both in terms of the environmental footprint of the batteries, but also the cost of those materials.
So many questions about what is the federal government doing. Do you get the anger that is out here?
How concerned are you about the front line?
You don't believe that there's a racial divide here?
Looking back, as president, did you tell the story of race in America enough, do you think? All the places I've been and all the things I've seen, all the people I've talked to, I carry with me. They're a part of what I do right here, holding the powerful accountable, keeping them honest.
AC 360, Tuesday through Saturday only on CNN.
This is the screen where it happens. The moments that can change the world.
These are the faces we see, the voices we empower. This is the work that continues, who we are today and what we can become.
This is journalism that reflects the world we live in.
He's interviewed 5 U.S. presidents, authored 7 books, and has an independent voice that resonates.
What happened to when we were united against a common enemy?
He's raw, unique, and one of America's most important talk show hosts. Watch Smerconish, Saturday on CNN.
Our mission here at CNN and journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster. More breaking news that we are following right now. You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts. We're learning more about our life plot. It is critically important. To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
Being a diver, there's so much they can do to protect the ocean and save the ocean. If you look at the ocean out there, okay, there's some net that's drifting in the water. Could be much bigger than the size of any boat out there, okay? So imagine a net being drifting. Okay, it can drift from days, months, years, until they get removed.
It's no longer catching fish for people, but sadly, it is still catching fish, and very often wildlife, like turtles and dolphins and seabirds.
A couple of times I almost got killed, being tangled. Got it! You found it? No, I'm holding it. I'm holding it. It's heavy. Age is only a figure, okay? There's so much we can do, no matter how old you are.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
I'm Matthew Chance in Kyiv, and this is CNN.
Time for our buried lead, where we cover stories we think are not getting enough attention. Good news today. Washington worked, or at least is working. The Senate today voted 86-12 in a procedural vote to move forward with legislation addressing the burn pits crisis. And a full vote could come as soon as this week. The bipartisan bill has been years in the making and could help millions of U.S. veterans previously exposed to toxic burn pits during their military service abroad. Burn pits were commonly used to incinerate everyday trash, hazardous material, chemical compounds, and more at military sites throughout Iraq and Afghanistan until about 2010. On this show, you have heard the stories from veterans who suffered horrific cancers and other diseases afterwards. And joining us live to discuss in an exclusive bipartisan interview, Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida and Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, both the co-sponsors of this legislation. Senator Gillibrand, let me start with you. Republican Senator Jerry Moran has said the VA has denied approximately 70% of veterans' burn pit claims since 9/11. How does this legislation ensure that the veterans will get the care they need?
Well, first of all, this is a great effort by Senator Rubio and I and others to work on a bipartisan basis to make sure when our veterans come home, when they are sick because of their service, that they will be covered. And so this bill creates a presumption. If you served on the War on Terror, if you served over the last 30 years and were exposed to burn pits, that any disease that you have, you are covered. And it changes the current process where survivors and veterans come forward, they're denied, they're asked to prove epidemiological causation, they're asked to prove what was actually burned at the burn pits, they're actually proved which burn pit were you exposed to. It's an outrage. And so this bill fixes that, and now they're all covered.
Senator Rubio, the Senate bill, as you know better than I, is named for Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson. He died a couple years ago from lung cancer after being exposed to burn pits during his service. His widow spoke to CNN a few weeks ago. I want you to listen to her plea to lawmakers.
As you go through, Senate building and the House of Representatives and Congress and Capitol Hill, you see POW flags all over the place. And you see these senators saying that they are here for veterans. These soldiers are actually prisoner of war at home in their own bodies as they're battling these health-related illnesses from toxic exposures. And I'm asking you that we need this passed now.
In the House, 174 Republicans voted against an earlier version of this legislation. In the Senate, 12 Republicans voted against moving forward with the bill in a procedural vote today. What's your message to them as you try to get this bill signed into law?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons why people vote against it. Some is based on cost, which I don't think is a good rationale, and others is based on the burden they think it'll place on the VA. But my view of it is this: the burden this is placed on families. Okay, we have people who are, in some cases, at the end of their lives, and others struggling with this financially. Their families are going through it. And then on top of everything else, you got to fight with your own government that deployed you to these dangerous war zones to begin with, exposed you to these toxins, and then you come home with a serious cancer or other illness, and now your entire family basically is turned upside down, and not in addition to the suffering these veterans are going through. So this presumption, I hope, will provide relief to thousands of families across this country that are dealing with this.
And for people who don't know, burn pits, they're illegal in the United States, but they were allowed in Iraq and Afghanistan right near military bases or on military bases. Senator Gillibrand, veterans who worked on these burn pits have told me that they're frustrated with the VA. Take a listen to Army veteran Isaiah James last fall. He served twice in Afghanistan and Iraq. This is him talking about what it's like to try to get treatment if you have one of these diseases.
Well, right now, the VA, first of all, they should be ashamed of themselves. Second of all, it's an adversarial relationship. The VA is basically victim blaming. They tell you, the service member, prove to me that you got this cancer from the burn pit, instead of let me treat this cancer and let me go back on the back end and audit it. We need a VA that's going to actually take the charge that Lincoln set forth to care for him and her who have borne the brunts of battle.
So, Senator Gillibrand, am I correct in assuming that the bill, yours and Senator Rubio's bill, will allow anyone who has been rejected in the past a new opportunity to come forward and apply for these benefits with this presumption that the bill takes care of?
Yes, it does. The bill that Marco and I wrote specifically creates a presumption for anyone exposed to burn pits at any time. And what the larger bill that this was put into also addresses toxic exposures and some problems as far back as Agent Orange. So this bill overall is going to give veterans, service members, the support they need. They're able to now go to the VA and get the support. And my view is this is the cost of war. If you're going to spend billions and billions of dollars in wars all across the globe over many decades, you have to remember that when these service members come home, when they are our veterans, we have to stand by them. It is the least we can do because they give everything, even their last measure, for this country.
And Senator Rubio, I know you've been working personally with veterans and their families on this. What, if assuming this legislation passes and becomes law, what will it mean to them?
Well, I think it'll mean that they no longer have to be fighting with the VA. Look, if someone's shot down or someone's injured or a bomb goes off and injures you, that's the causation that the traditional system looks at. These things, this is impossible to prove the way they're asking for it to be proven. But I think that there's a very strong argument for that presumption. You have people that are suffering from cancers way outside of proportion from what they would as members of the general population. And the fact of the matter is they'll never be able to prove that causation. In the meantime, their families are going bankrupt. They've had to quit their jobs to become full-time caregivers. So in addition to sort of the moral argument for why we shouldn't have to fight with our own government to get this care if you're a veteran, is the reality of what this means to these families and how devastating it is. And hopefully that line and that process will become simpler for them now so they can get the care they need.
Well, let me just say, as an American, more of this, please. It's good to see, and it's good to see Washington work, and it's good to see a Democrat and a Republican teaming up to help our men and women in uniform. So thank you so much for what you did, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Really.
Hello, I'm Isa Suarez in London. We're now going to leave the lead with Jake Tapper and take a deeper look at today's international stories for our viewers right around the world. I'll be bringing you the global brief in just a few minutes. We'll take you across eastern Ukraine, where fierce battles are raging for control of the Donbass. New satellite images show hospitals have been hit in 2 key cities. We'll also get an update on a counteroffensive in southern Ukraine, where CNN's Matthew Chance just returned from the front lines. Then, in the debrief, leaders from the West